And the next one that we'll be talking about is reporting requirements for disposal facilities. Disposal facilities are landfills, transformation facilities, EMSW conversion facilities that don't exclusively convert source-separated tires or biomass, waste tire disposal facilities, inert debris, landfills, etc., that dispose any tonnage inside the state of California. And they'll need to report on both on what comes into their facility, like transfer processor, and any material that may not get disposed and in fact leave the facility out the back end, or send beneficial reuse material to another landfill, as well as the actual tons disposed. So there are quite a few requirements on disposal facilities, many of which existed pre-RDRS in current DRS, but some of these requirements are somewhat new or modified a little bit. So we'll try our best to very methodically just kind of cover each of these from the perspective of a disposal facility. So if you were here last time, we picked on Ralph Chandler and named it Ralph's Landfill. That's the organization / site that we'll be dealing with for the next few minutes or so. The reporting entity type is disposal facility, and the RDRS activity name is the same, because let's just say that's the only thing taking place on the site. There's not additional composting or anything like that, just kind of for simplicity's sake. But we can talk about ways to or how you would account for residuals that are generated on the site a little bit later. So if folks are not seeing that and are confused, don't worry. It's just because I made tried to simplify this, but we can account for those residuals that are generated as a result of dependent sub-activities, and we'll be discussing that a little bit later in the program. Okay, so material, this is, again, material that is accepted from direct haul. So like the transfer processor, you would report these as an aggregate for all the tons of direct haul accepted. And taking a look at the top here, direct haul designated waste and direct haul disaster debris. You're recording the tons. The material type is already specified in the name of the stream. So you basically just report the tons of each of those materials that you accepted for disposal over the course of the reporting period. So for instance, 4,000 tons of designated waste and 5,000 tons of disaster debris I got from direct haul. And that would essentially be what you would be responsible for reporting. You would report that information to the department quarterly for all the quarters for which you receive those streams of waste. Okay, similar situation for the direct hauled non-green material beneficial reuse. So we're not calling it potential beneficial reuse anymore because it's reached the point where it is about to be used as beneficial reuse. So the landfill makes a decision to accept a discrete amount of each material type for beneficial reuse. So if it's the case that they accepted 5,000 tons of ADC compost overs, that's not green material beneficial reuse. It's considered non-green material because it doesn't fit the Title 27 definition of processed green material. And that's getting a little bit into the weeds, but just to kind of explain, well, compost overs, that's green, isn't it? Well, not according to the way we've siloed this stream. And that the reason why, kind of not to get too technical, but it's to differentiate that from, again, the Title 27 process green material that is going to be considered disposal as of Jan 1, 2020, as I've alluded to now several times. So you would report, 5,000 tons of compost overs received from direct haul. You report now if it is Title 27 green material, you would indicate that in terms of jurisdiction of origin. So direct hauled green material you got, it would be 3,000 tons from Sac County, 1,000 tons from Sac City, that kind of thing, if that's indeed what happened. Now, in terms of direct hauled solid waste, again, like all of these, it's an aggregate tonnage accepted for disposal and in landfill. In this example, you would attribute that to, you would provide the jurisdiction of origin and the source sector for that material that you accepted, like 400 tons Benicia, 300 tons Martinez, 250 Concord, 200 Hayward, and so on. So, that's not a new requirement for disposal facilities. But what is new is the tracking the source sector on the inbound. So you'll need to provide a breakdown, not just jurisdictionally, but also percent residential, commercial, self-hauled. Overall. Right, not by jurisdiction, thank you. It's overall for the direct haul solid waste inflow tons to a disposal facility. All right, next slide talks about material, again, from transfer processors. We talked about how RDRS basically records the jurisdiction of origin information at the time that it was received by the first receiving reporting entity, and that information is seamlessly passed through, one or more other reporting entities prior to being accepted for disposal by the landfill. So it's not a requirement to track jurisdiction of origin for the material that is accepted from each transfer processor. So just and I think, I try to make it abundantly clear, whereas this one here is total aggregated tons of each of these streams. This is for each transfer processor. You would need to report each stream separately. Total tons accepted of each stream for each transfer processor from which material is received. So I can't stress that enough. It's not an aggregate, it's by receiving transfer processor, and that's in order to preserve, again, the jurisdiction of origin information with respect to this. So while you don't, while the landfill doesn't enter the jurisdiction of origin, it is being tracked in RDRS. So they would simply accept that they would receive, again, so kind of to preview RDRS. Because transfer processors report prior to disposal facilities, we're expecting that transfer processors will have already submitted their reports by the time the disposal facility opens theirs. So when the disposal facility opens theirs, they're going to see that, for instance, this transfer processor reported sending them 5 different streams of material, and they can accept or modify those incoming tonnages. So in doing so, the jurisdiction of origin is passed along for both solid waste and green material potential benefit or beneficial reuse accepted for disposal from each transfer processor. So if it for whatever reason, the transfer processor dropped the ball on that reporting, the disposal facility has the ability to sort of add that in as if it were added by the transfer processor. So we say that these are by material type, but really it's just by the stream sort of subsumes the material type. So it's essentially, you just confirm the tons accepted from transfer processor A. So 500 tons accept from transfer processor A, 400 tons accept from transfer processor B of solid waste. That's essentially all that's required of you to report, not the jurisdiction. Green material, same thing, 400 tons from TPA, 400 tons from TPB. Non-green material potential or beneficial reuse accepted from other transfer processors. You would report the tons of each material type accepted for beneficial reuse at the disposal facility. Disaster debris and designated waste as well, you just accept the tons. Now there's also a possibility that you can accept these tons and not use them as beneficial reuse, but that you would need to send it out as beneficial reuse. If you accept a material as beneficial reuse and then it turns out that, I applied it actually as solid waste, you would need to back out the tons that you accepted from beneficial reuse and then reapply that to the solid waste as an inflow. So in other words, back it out and bring it back in as what you actually did with it. All right, now let's talk about on-site disposal. So this is something that's not really modifiable within the context of RDRS, meaning what you accepted for disposal is what the system is going to assume you disposed. So for instance, as we discussed here, solid waste disposed from transfer processor A. You don't need to indicate the jurisdiction because that information's already been submitted by transfer processor A and on the way to you. So it will be allocated appropriately. You just confirm that you disposed the tons that you said you accepted from them. Solid waste disposed from direct haul, you do need to provide the jurisdiction of origin source sector for the direct hauled on-site disposal. But that I assume you would have done on the inflow screen. So it's not the case that you're typing it in twice. What you said you got on the inflow is going to basically be what you disposed for direct hauled solid waste. Same thing with disaster and designated. Once you report accepting those streams for disposal, that's going to automatically be added to the on-site disposal tally. So essentially, a lot of that information is already going to be kind of typed in for you. All right, now taking a look here at application of beneficial reuse material. I wanted to break out green material beneficial reuse first because it's a little bit different. So as we talked about with, this is kind of analogous to the transfer processor allocations with you're getting material on the inbound for the direct haul. So we talked about how that's an aggregated tonnage amount with jurisdiction of origin information. We talked about how the material, if you report accepting material from transfer processors, for instance, A and B, how that information is already retained in the system and no additional jurisdiction of origin information is required to be input by you, the disposal facility, at that point. So you would basically, for all materials for which you accepted, well, in this case, let's just focus on green material beneficial reuse. For each of the streams from which you reported accepting green material beneficial reuse, you would say what they were used for on site. So you would report the tons that went to alternative daily cover from direct haul, from transfer processor A and from transfer processor B. And for the direct haul, you would provide the jurisdiction of origin allocation breakdown for that. You'd do the same thing for the tons of AIC or alternative intermediate cover that you accepted from each facility. Or direct haul, you would indicate how many tons of each of those streams ended up going to that, as well as construction and landscaping and erosion control. Those are other beneficial reuse possibilities at a landfill that you would need to indicate the tons of the green material that went to that. I'm not sure how relevant that is in the context of green material, Title 27 green material for these other uses, but if indeed that was the case, you would indicate as such. Perhaps a more relevant example will be for this subsequent one, non-green material, potential beneficial reuse. The bottom two are the same. The only thing that changes is the top, because you don't track jurisdiction of origin for the non-green material beneficial reuse. You similarly don't need to track that either, but you would need to track the tons of each material type of non-green material potential beneficial reuse that went to each use on site. So tons of ADC compost from the direct haul that went to ADC compost, you would say the total tons of that. If they were like construction ADC accepted from direct haul, you would also have the tons of that. So for each material type, you would say, how many tons went to which. And this diagram essentially lays that out. And you're responsible for keeping track of the tons of each of these discrete streams. And the ultimate disposition of that with respect to beneficially reused at a landfill. Okay. Yeah, we'll go ahead and cover this and then sort of take some questions and maybe take a little bit of a break. So this is a disposal facility, again, this same example, a Ralph's landfill. Now, this is largely the same for transfer processor as a disposal facility. A lot of these streams are going to look similar to the transfer processor outflow that we covered, several slides ago. But I'll flag a couple of differences here. The one is this very top arrow. So this is an instance where material was not disposed by the landfill. It was directly transferred to another solid waste facility. In that instance, the disposal facility is not acting like a disposal facility. It's acting more so like a transfer processing facility or operation. And because that's the case, the regulations require that disposal facility now report according to the requirements for transfer processors. So yeah, essentially, if you act like a transfer processor, you gotta report like one if you're a disposal facility. We're not foreclosing the possibility that there could be, additional direct transfer that occurs for material that's accepted but potentially not disposed. Although this is something that we'll probably want to take a look at in the context of reporting. So. If they directly transfer that material and don't dispose it, meaning they got it from either direct haul or another transfer processor for whatever reason, the solid waste wasn't disposed, instead it was transferred to another facility, report according to the requirements for transfer processor sending outflow of solid waste to another facility. And that requirement is to provide both jurisdiction of origin and the source sector composition for each flow into each facility. Now, if the material was instead generated on site, meaning like, for instance, recovered by the landfill at the, at the working face or prior to, you know, entering the landfill arena, perhaps, a self-haul customer was instructed to pull over and dump, recoverable materials elsewhere. That you would account for these tonnages in terms of this, and if you ended up sending it to disposal, you would indicate the tons, the material type, and the RDRS number / contact information of the solid waste that was generated on site that's now heading to another facility. This may be relevant for transformation facilities, for instance, that generate as a part of their operations ash, and that ash is then sent on to another solid waste disposal facility. You would host assign those tonnages and provide the material type. Actually, you would just say the material type is solid waste for that. So moving down one, we got this black arrow here. That's material that is not, for whatever reason, the landfill chose to send green material potential beneficial reuse on. Maybe they took in too much or something, and or maybe they want to share their bounty with another facility. They could send that on to another destination. If that were the case, they would need to still provide the jurisdiction of origin for that outflow of green material, beneficial reuse. All right, the next two, designated and disaster. Yes, that's essentially the same as transfer processor, just the tons and the receiving facility contact information. Non-green material, you'll need to break that down by what exactly it is, and then tons and facility, receiving facility contact information. Same thing for sending recycling, composting outflows. Let's say they send off metals that were collected from the working face or something like that. Large pieces of scrap metal that were picked out and then maybe sent to recycling, composting. You would say you sent scrap metal or ferrous metals or non-ferrous metals, however you sent it out, and the tons of that to the recycler, composter, and indicate the RDRS number and contact information of that reporting entity. If you're a landfill sending material for broker transporting, you would say the tons and the material type and the broker or transporter that took and then determined the destination of that material that you're sending to them. If you're a landfill and you're sending material to end users, for instance, this dependent activity produces finished compost, and it's the lead entity is reporting for them, as is depicted in this here chart. You would say you send tons of 500 tons finished compost to material consumer end user. Let's say you had a purchase agreement with a farm or something. You would indicate the tons of finished compost that you sent to the county within which that end user was located. We'll talk about methods for determining and reporting some of those aspects as well. I think we have one more slide, and then it'd be appropriate to take a break here as we're kind of getting to that time. Out of state, let's see, I think, it's going to be relatively the same. The only difference is, again, the recycling and composting outflow, if you were to send to that. you wouldn't provide the contact information or end user category for that material. And I think my green material arrow might have got cut off, but in any case, that's the black arrow, meaning you retain jurisdiction of origin information for material that's sent out of state. For green material, beneficial reuse. And we talked about how there's two possibilities for solid waste disposal. Meaning if you directly transferred it, you would need to report the jurisdiction of origin source sector sent to out-of-state disposal facility. And if material was generated on site and then sent to another solid waste disposal facility out of state, you would report tons of solid waste sent, and that material would be host assigned in terms of jurisdiction of origin. So other than that, it's essentially the same as the requirements for the disposal facility sending in-state, with the exception of that recycling, composting, not needing to provide the contact information. Everything else is pretty much the same as for disposal facility in-state, as well as another analogous thing would be transfer processor outflow for out-of-state. So let's go ahead, and we have about 3 minutes to our break, which gives us some time to take questions if you might have them from either in person or online. Regarding anything up to this point, including disposal facility.
We have a few, so maybe take one. I think you addressed this, but this is from Jeffrey Hahn. Separate ferrous and non-ferrous recovered metals sent to metal recycler. Would you report on the weight and location only?
So sent to metal recycler, if the metal recycler had was a reporting entity, you would indicate the RDRS number and contact information for that receiving reporting entity. And if that's how you sold it, as discrete ferrous tons and non-ferrous tons, that would be the way that you would report to us those transactions in RDRS. So good question.
He has two more small ones like this. The second is, what about ash trucks to ash monofill on site? Would that be tonnage only that you're reporting?
Yeah, it would, tons and material type, but the jurisdiction of origin would be host assigned to that facility.
And the last one on this question is small vans of police or sheriff assured destruction material. Weight and material type only?
Yeah, not sure if that's, if that's on the inbound or outbound. If you are accepting that material for disposal on the direct haul, you would need to ask them where they're coming from and take some efforts to find out what the source sector of that material is. We have a provision that says, small vehicles can be called, designated source sector of self-hauled. So if you feel like, that's how you want to assign it, that's an acceptable method. So we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. We'll talk about, what information needs to be recorded for each transaction, how to keep track of that kind of thing. But yeah, maybe a little bit more clarification on that would help. So if you want to just clarify what you mean in terms of inbound versus outbound, or a little bit more about that police thing, we would be happy to continue the conversation. At this point, we're going to take our little afternoon break. We're right on schedule here. So folks online, this is going to be about a 10-minute dead air pause, and we'll come back at 3 and resume. Well, we're going to be talking about recycler, composter, and broker, transporter, and some methods stuff. So 10 minutes, come right back. Thanks. Thanks for waiting, folks. We're going to pick it right back up again. We've just covered the reporting requirements. So just to sort of recap, the reporting requirements for the disposal facilities, and we've talked about what information needs to be tracked with respect to inbound and outbound tonnages, and also final deposition in landfill or, transform, that sort of thing.